Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in our show notes, and check out our website for all the blogs and guides you would ever need about MTSS. Implementing and building MTSS in any district can be quite a feat, especially in large urban schools with a vast array of students and needs. Today, we are going to talk about how one of those kind of large districts, Chicago Public Schools, did this. And we have on our podcast Toni Liza-DeMello, who is the District MTSS Manager for CPS. And joining her is Dr. Eva Dundas, our Chief Academic Officer of Branching Minds, who has worked with CPS along the journey. And I'm so excited to share the CPS story and the progress that they have made. So I will pass the mic to them to take it away.
Hi, I'm Eva Dundas. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Branching Minds. So my background, I'm a developmental cognitive psychologist. And at Branching Minds, my role is really to make sure we're leveraging that learning science research and education best practices as we're building out our MTSS offering. I have had the great honor to work with Chicago Public Schools and see the fantastic work that Toni has done with the district in a leadership role across the district for their MTSS work. So excited to have her here today and talk a bit more about what that journey has looked like for Chicago. So Toni, I'll turn it over to you quickly.
Sure. Thank you so much, Eva. Yeah, I am Toni DeMello. I lead MTSS for Chicago Public Schools.
So today we are really here to learn about the story of MTSS at Chicago Public Schools and really what that journey has looked like to build a comprehensive system across a really large urban district. And importantly, to build a system and a practice that is equitable for students. And so we'll talk a little bit about who Chicago is. And I know not many districts in this country fit the mold of a Chicago Public Schools. But I think you'll hear as the story is evolving and as we're going through this, there are a lot of commonalities across schools of all sizes or districts of all sizes in what this MTSS journey looks like. So we'll make a point to really kind of highlight some of those commonalities as we're talking through this. So we'll start with what that entry point looked like in Chicago, some of the steps that Toni went through and kind of building district-wide support and kind of emphasizing the importance of building that district level support for an MTSS system. And then last but very, very important, how do we make that actually work at the school level? So strengthening those systems on the ground in a school building and what some of those tips and tricks are for getting that to work. And then talk a little bit about lessons learned along the way throughout that journey and where that journey's going, because it's an ever-evolving process to get towards a better, equitable MTSS system. And so I will turn it over to you, Toni.
Thanks. So oftentimes when I'm asked to present and talk about MTSS, the way I organize my thoughts is thinking about this as a compelling story. I kind of divide this up into chapters. As this journey began, thinking about it as this compelling story where student success is the kind of the final chapter that we're always reaching towards, is the best way for me to organize our thoughts. So with that, we will start with the prologue. So who are we? A little bit about who we are, just very quickly, is we've 325,000 students, give or take. We are divided up in what we call networks. So if I refer to a network, just know that networks, we have 17, actually 18 total networks. 14 are elementary, 4 are high school. We have an ISP. And so each one of those networks are bound by about anywhere from 27 to 36 schools. And so you can kind of think of them as little mini districts for maybe some of you, right? And so that's somewhat of our structure, our demographics. We have just a lot of different students, some great diversity amongst our students, and of course within all within the city here. So just a little bit about who we are and what we kind of deal with. I thought it was important to share with you our CPS core values. And I see MTSS in every single one of these core values. And I'm going to talk about this more around senior leadership buy-in and whatnot. But for us and for me and for the team, the MTSS team, this is really important to always go back to and help people recognize that CPS has set these values and MTSS can be seen in each one of them. And so we really try to prioritize MTSS as being something that people need to hold as important within their networks and within their schools.
Just before we go on, just a quick question. What's an ISP, Toni?
Oh, I'm so sorry. ISP, it's called independent schools. So networks have supports. They have a chief. They have instructional support leaders and whatnot. Again, if you think of it as like a little mini district, ISP, they're independent, so they do not have necessarily that level of support and guidance. They do follow all the same standards, all the same priorities of the district, but they don't have that additional layer of oversight. Thank you for that question. We are also, what CPS is Chicago Public Schools. Yeah, we are acronym rich in Chicago Public Schools. So I will apologize in advance if I throw out an acronym it's in our nature. It's ground in me now. So thank you for stopping. So chapter 1, embarking on this MTSS journey. About maybe 7 years ago or something, we started thinking about MTSS. Like everyone else, we shifted from an RTI, and we recognize that RTI now is under MTSS, and so we began to shift this. And as a district, we really began to think about what does MTSS mean, and how do we implement it more holistically. At this point, I was a team of one. I am going to sit here right now. I don't care how big your school district is, how big your school is, how big anything is. Do not do this. Do not be a team of one. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you really pull others in. But I've tried it and it doesn't work. You need support from others within the district, within the school, within the network, whatever your frame is. Teams of one, it's a good place to start. You don't want to live there. For us, I branched out and then began to elevate and pull in supports from our networks. Okay, that's going back to our structure. And so I knew that people that were really more boots on the ground, that were really in the schools, I cannot visit over 400 schools and support them, but network staff can. And so I started enlisting network-based support to help me get this messaging and to help me really help schools understand. And then, of course, school-based. I don't want to negate senior leadership and our leadership team, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but I cannot tell you how important it is to get school-based buy-in, for schools to identify people that will help to lead this work. In each one of these sections, we identified, or I helped people identify others that could help me really lead this work into implementation.
Awesome. So I just wanted to take a moment and kind of talk through this like early structure. Because, like we've said before, Chicago is a very unique situation, one of the largest districts in the country. Very few districts are at that size, but this is not a unique problem. And it's almost heartening to hear that even at a district at that size, you can start at a place where you're thinking of MTSS as a team of one. That's something that we see across the country, is that MTSS is a team. It's a person. It's just a small little contingent within a school or within a district. And that's really antithetical to what MTSS is, because it's a system of support. It really should be a system or a framework that we're using to support all of students within a district. So it's counterintuitive that a lot of people think of it as a single team or as under the ownership of a single person. But there's lots of, reasons why it comes that way. And I think understanding those challenges helps us to build out of that mentality. And one of those is this idea that it came from an RTI model, or a process in which we were trying to identify students who may have a learning disability or need special education support. So it's this idea that it's just this group of people who are focused on additional tier 2 or tier 3 level of support for students, and that they can work in isolation because it's just about that extra little support to give those students to, prior to getting a special education referral. But that's really not what MTSS is. And so part of this journey from that, RTI practice or an MTSS team of one is about making those connections to the broader system and what MTSS really is intended to be, so that we can think about it more of the systemic level support. And that's a great area that Toni started in thinking about, of like, how do we do this work to really try and help people understand what MTSS is.
Absolutely. So what I did, very early on, is try to, because as many of you have probably, I'm sure many of you have been doing this for any length of time, have heard, oh, A, this is gonna, this will pass, or B, this is just RTI, renamed. And so I recognize that I really need to re-image MTSS and kind of almost rebrand it. And so we added this equity-based MTSS. Yes, it's somewhat semantics, but it makes a difference. Our language and how we talk about MTSS makes a difference. And so these are the three things that we really, really keyed in on as I began to then message this out to schools, to networks, and also to departments within CPS. It's a multi-tiered approach. It's data-driven and it's evidence-based. And what an MTSS framework really does is puts all of this together, because it directly aligns and supports targeted universalism. When you frame an equity-based MTSS or MTSS like that, it is very difficult for anyone to negate what you're trying to implement. How do you negate the fact that targeted universalism is truly what all students need in order to be successful? And so that was one of the things that we did very early on, is to recognize we wanted people to be thinking about this differently. Now, I did this with many different groups within Chicago Public Schools. Again, remember, I talked about, being a team of one. So I started knocking on doors, literally and figuratively, because kind of some of this was over COVID, right? But I began knocking on doors. I went to our Office of Language and Culture. I went to Teaching and Learning, where my department sits, but also the Department of STEM sits, and the Department of Literacy, or ELA, Quick shout out. I know one of my colleagues from the Department of ELA is here, but Department of the Social Sciences. And so I started really reaching out to those departments and those colleagues. So the Office of Social Emotional Support, huge partners. I can't even begin to say huge partners, but I began reaching out to all of these departments and saying, help me help you. How can I leverage their expertise in their content areas and in their areas of specialty to help them support MTSS and get this messaging out, and B, build their capacity to understand what MTSS is, because we were really all learning and growing together. We are all really reimagining an equity-based MTSS framework together. And again, I couldn't do this alone. What was the best way to do that is by gaining partnerships. It was all grounded in our equity department's equity framework, which includes and focuses in on liberatory thinking, inclusive partnerships, fair policies and systems, and resource equity. If that's not really and truly encompasses all of what MTSS is, I don't know what it is. Because we had to get people to break free of this notion that MTSS was just about interventions. We had to get them past that it was just about academics. So how did we do some of that? Eva?
Yes. So we building the concept of this, that this really is a structure and a system to accomplish all of the things that leadership teams want to accomplish. And so even though MTSS still might sit under specific intervention teams or teams of interventions, we know that this is a framework for how we support everyone. So specifically at Chicago Public Schools, there are these 5 offices that Toni's already touched on. And while they might not be offices at every other district or at every other school, these are stakeholder voices that are really important in getting buy-in and how to think about that work, and pulling those voices in and making sure that we're all aligned in how we're thinking about MTSS. So Office of Social and Emotional Learning, Toni mentioned, that is a team or a group of people that very early on worked hand in hand with thinking about MTSS. And so again, if you don't have an Office of Social Emotional Learning, you might not even have a team of social emotional learning. You might not use those words, but we're still thinking about what are those skills that we can help support students in. How can we think about developing the whole child? And how does that fit into an MTSS framework? So a place that Chicago started, which is a place that a lot of schools are starting, is really just trying to dive into what different SEL assessments look like and how we can incorporate that data into not only our tier 1 instruction, but also to identify areas of need in tier 2 and tier 3 levels of support, because that fits really, really nicely within this MTSS framework of support. And so one assessment that the SEL team at Chicago adopted was the SECA, which I think we'll share out resources on that, but it's open source. It's out of Washoe County, was put together by American Institute of Research to do the validation study of that assessment. But basically, the district took a really comprehensive approach and targeted approach to identifying schools who were going to administer this assessment at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, help teachers understand how to use that data to understand areas of need across their student population. So how do we use that then to bolster tier 1 levels of support for SEL needs? And then again, to use that data for students who might need additional support to target specific SEL competencies that might that they might benefit from that additional support. And so this was a really successful launch at CPS. With the first year, this was administered to a pilot, I believe, was around 60 schools, Toni? Yeah. So around 60 schools administered the assessment. Teachers, again, use that to guide that tier 1 instruction. And at the end of the year, they saw improvements across all SEL competencies in students. And I think one of the things that was really impressive and really important was that students themselves actually found a lot of value in the assessment being administered. They felt it helped their teachers understand them. They thought it was important for this information to be shared with their staff. And then teachers actually really reported a positive reception to it as well. So that's definitely one way to get buy-in in MTSS, is to make sure your teachers are just really entrenched in the work and see that positive benefit. And so incorporating SEL data into that MTSS framework, I think, was a major quick win for Chicago Public Schools. Toni, is there anything else to touch on there?
No, you absolutely hit it. I think it would really, being able to balance the academic with social emotional. We talk about it in CPS as that you can't talk about one without the other, and these tools allowed us to be able to talk about, analyze data with both. And so I think that was part of that reimagining, is really making sure that people understood that we're talking about the whole child. And if you think back to our CPS core values, that is one of our core values. So,
yeah, and I think that exactly it touched on that really important foundation of having academics and SEL data hand in hand, because then that really is a foundation for all of the other departments as well, of the things that they care about in terms of framing this work as supporting the whole child. And so another area, particularly for Chicago Public Schools, was the Office of Language and Culture. And again, you might not have this office at your district, but I guarantee you probably have some English language learners or multi-language learners at your school, and you have people who are dedicated to supporting them. And so bringing those folks into the MTSS practice is incredibly important. And so we're going to share out a lot of some resources around how to think about supporting ELL students within the MTSS framework. But some of those kind of grounding principles around supporting these students starts in, and again, thinking about, this is an opportunity for us to look at holistic data across student needs. We can look at academics, we can look at their strengths, we can look at those cultural and linguistic factors and really develop a comprehensive understanding of these students, and then use our data to determine what needs to be done to support them. So with these students, framing this really as, they are a part of the MTSS practice. ELL students are not excluded from Tier 1. They have equal access to that core curriculum and a continuum of supports at that Tier 2 and Tier 3 level. So we're thinking about this as a way to really ground our support for ELL students in this tiered framework that is more specific to the needs of these ELL students. And particularly comes important when talking about understanding and identifying ELL needs, and if there is learning disability. So how we can make sure that we're leveraging this framework to use data, comparing that data on ELLs to their ELL peers and the progress that they're making. So we're able to really tease apart whether or not we're looking at language issues or an underlying learning disability.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Eva. So thank you for calling that out. And I know this is not exclusive to CPS, but we see a disproportionate amount of students, of our Black and Brown students, that are being referred for special education and things of that nature. And so really having a solid grasp and solid, firm implementation of an MTSS framework helps us to ensure that all students are receiving what they need, and not being over referred into our special ed department. And so again, was really important. That was what opened the door for me with our Office of Language and Culture, is saying, help me help you. We want to help teachers and schools understand, what an MTSS framework looks like, and what it means for our, EL students. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, check out those resources of how to bring those folks in to the conversation with you all. But it really is a really important group of people to get on the same page around how to support our learners. Because we don't want to be thinking about, we've got our MTSS work over here and our ELL work over here. The work that those teams are doing really is integrated. Or at least it really should be for what's best for those students. All right, next Office of Equity. Again, haven't seen this office in many places, but I love that you all have one. And even if your own district does not have a Department of Equity, I guarantee you've got people who care about equity, and you've got folks who are dedicated to thinking about if you are delivering support that is meeting the needs of all students, and if that is meeting the needs of students that are traditionally underserved. And so how do we kind of sell the value propositions of MTSS to the folks at your school or district who are invested in equity? And to me, this one is so straightforward because MTSS is equity. It really is a data-driven approach to understanding who needs what when, and that by in and of itself is an equitable approach to delivering support. And so there are lots of different ways that this comes into play with MTSS. We share a few resources. First and foremost, one of the major things we're seeing is just using your assessment data to understand who needs what level of support. It's a foundational principle of MTSS, and it's so simple yet so hard to actually achieve when you're thinking about making sure that you're using the right assessments, you're using good and consistent cut points, you're applying them equitably to understand which students need support. Throughout this journey that we've seen with so many different districts of varying different sizes, one common thing that you see is they might have a good universal screener, but they're not applying it in an equitable way. Teachers are still using referral or some other process for identifying who needs additional tier 2 or tier 3 levels of support. And we know when that decision is being made by teacher referral, it's not always the most equitable. So really making sure that your MTSS practice is grounded in those principles of universal assessment and identification of tiered support is one of those core principles of equity. And I know, Toni, that's something that you have evolved with the district to really focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to elevate some of the key points around equity for us as well is culturally responsive, curriculum, certainly culturally responsive and relevant instruction. And at the very core, in Eva talked about this, and I talked about this earlier around targeted universalism, is that you have high quality tier 1. It starts there. And I always tell schools, or I'll tell networks, I say, have you looked at your tier 1? Do you have high quality curriculum and instruction going on in tier 1? Because and again, Eva's heard me say this a million times, is that you cannot tier 2 and tier 3 yourself out of a tier 1 problem. And so I think people, again, kind of coming from this RTI, leftover RTI messaging that people get, that they continue to think about MTSS as just interventions, and we really, really stress that it's you've got to have tier 1 in place. It's got to be equitable for all of our students before we look beyond that. So.
Awesome. All right. So next important area, Office of Diverse Learner Support. So at Chicago Public Schools, this is special education. So it is incredibly important to get aligned with your folks in special education around what this work looks like. And one of the the grounding principles there is really to reframe this as that all students are general education students. Even if a student's receiving special education services, they still need access to general education. So that tier 1 core curriculum that is suited to their needs is a requirement. And so making sure that we frame this as, a student who's receiving special education services might at some point just be sufficiently served by differentiated core instruction. They might need tier 2 level of support, or they might need tier 3 level of support. MTSS is a fluid practice of adapting to the support level that a student needs, and that is independent of the special education services that they are receiving. Because we want to make sure that we're using our data to continually inform what a student needs at any given point. So really thinking about making sure that MTSS and special education are not these separate tracks. Special education is not tier 4. It is a service that is provided that helps access the education, and that is across all tier levels of support that a student might need. So really getting aligned with these folks is super critical, and we've got some resources on how to do that. Toni, any?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Getting having them understand. One of the biggest, chuckle, but everyone on this call has probably heard that MTSS is not a verb, and so just really helping our folks in this Office of Special Education, and helping them, because again, I mean, we've had RTI, and old things die hard, and helping them understand RTI is just part of MTSS. And so really making sure that I'm going to talk about using the same and common language, so that teachers and so staff and folks hear, but not just common language, but common understanding. And so it's been really important to disentangle ourselves in some regards, but yet help our special ed department, or our Office of Diverse Learner Support, as we refer to it, really help them understand what an MTSS framework is, what an equitable MTSS framework is, and how all students fit into that, into that framework.
And last but not least, Office of College and Career Readiness. These are also really important folks to bring into the conversation. No matter who you are, you've got people who are thinking about how we're getting kids to graduate and what's next for them after that. And so how we have this conversation with these folks and how we help them with their work is, again, reframing this in terms of MTSS is about leveraging our data to understand what students need and best supporting them. And so what data sources are we thinking about when we're talking about college and career readiness? So early warning systems around identifying pieces of data for students who might not who are at risk for not graduating on time. Those pieces of data can very easily fit within an MTSS framework. So we're understanding when we get to those upper grades, what's the information, what data sources are we really trying to use to identify students who may need additional support, and how do we develop those plans to get them there? So in terms of early warning systems, a lot of work is done in terms of identifying, those course failures, behavior citations, so out of school suspension and attendance. We've got those core pieces of data that we know are really predictive, but then even moving beyond that to thinking about what are those other risk indicators that we can be incorporating to really better understand the holistic needs of our students. So if we've, had an MTSS practice in place for years, hopefully by the time kids are getting to secondary, you've got a rich history of that academic, social, emotional data and their learning journey. So all of that information can be used to really create comprehensive support plans to make sure that we're getting kids to graduation, or getting them to graduation prepared. All right, so I'm going to just move on quickly because we've got the last area.
Yeah, no, we can, and What I would like to do, Eva, is again talking about the district-wide support. You've got to get district buy-in. You have to get senior leadership and district buy-in. They need to see MTSS as a priority. What I want to do, chapter 3, and I am not negating schools, but I do want to give us all an opportunity to ask questions. You're going to get this deck. What I want to do is just tell you what you're going to get, and then we can open it up for some questions. What I have linked here is how we begin to approach MTSS from a systems infrastructure. And so these graphics, we talk about starting with a foundation, then you build the walls, then you put on the roof, and then you do the interior. And all of these are very, very important. But again, your MTSS house cannot stand without a solid foundation. The way we help schools and networks understand how and progress monitor how their implementation and how they're building MTSS is through what we call our continuum. You'll get all of this documentation. You'll get all of this information in these slides. So I'm not going to keep them forever and go into them in depth so that we can get to some questions. It consists of 7 domains. And again, when you look at the continuum, you'll get a PDF of it. We really help schools identify where they're at along the continuum. And then we support schools on making progress across that continuum. And again, you can imagine at a district this size, we really leverage our network helps as well. And so again, really important to provide schools with something very concrete in order to support them in their implementation. You can't just give them a bunch of stuff and say, go and implement. And so we have a very structured system for doing that, and that's the continuum. What we've learned along the way, we've had a lot of success with data collection. We build out reports and a dashboard. It's really important to be able to give our schools data around their implementation, and that includes the continuum. I talked about fostering the collaboration in other departments. That has been a game changer for me, an absolute game changer. It's to a point now where departments come to me and say, "Hey, how can we get on board with this?" I'm like, "Whoa!" There's so many now departments and folks that really want to be integrated into the work, and so I can't stress that enough. Ongoing PLCs and opportunities for schools to learn. They soak it in, so give them a lot. We've provided the platform. Thank you, Branching Minds, for giving us a place to put all this information. You can't ask a school to do anything. One of the things that I found, I couldn't ask schools to do anything and not give them the tools to be able to do it. Tried that, it didn't work. So make sure that you have the tools and the resources in place to support your schools. Super, super important. Challenges, and I'll be honest, staffing, of course, allocation of time, teachers, it's hard. It's hard to always be documenting and to do the problem-solving process to make sure that you're identifying students that need interventions equitably and with multiple pieces of data. Always resistance to change. It just is. It's a thing. I recognize that from small schools to big schools, small districts to large districts. There will always be that resistance. And then just my biggest challenge, but greatest consideration, is helping our partners, our stakeholders, everyone that will bother to listen to me, is that MTSS is not just another district initiative. They have to see it as being what you do. It's not another thing. Those of you who are still in schools, or whether it be administration or as a teacher, you know what that feels like. And so we just really have to change that mindset around and make this doable so that people see it as the thing rather than another thing. Again, just connecting. It's not another thing. And the story continues. It's not over. But really implementing MTSS with fidelity can build the capacity to support every learner. I truly, truly believe that. And I will continue writing this story and writing chapters as we go, and documenting our missteps along with our successes as we go.
Thanks for listening to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.